Well, welcome back. While you were gone, we rolled out the virtual red carpet for our last, but certainly not least, presenter. It is my pleasure to introduce our closing keynote speaker for today, Nancy Proctor, and her presentation, Wiring the Pervasive Museum. Nancy Proctor is Deputy Director of Digital Experience and Communications at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and co-chair of Museums in the Web Annual Conference. She recently headed up mobile strategy and initiatives for the Smithsonian Institution. With a PhD in American art history and a background in filmmaking, curation, and art criticism, Nancy Proctor published her first online exhibition in 1995. She co-founded the gallery channel.com in 1998 with Titus Bicknell to present virtual tours of innovative exhibitions alongside comprehensive global museum and gallery listings. Please welcome me in introducing Nancy Proctor. Take it away, Nancy.
Thank you, Alex. Just a quick sound check. Are you all hearing me okay?
Yes, sounds
okay,
good.
Fantastic.
Look good.
Good. Well, I would like to dedicate this presentation to Suze Cairns and to Neil Stimler. For the reason that back when Suze started blogging, she was asking people to talk about how they became museum technologists. And I told her, my story is so very boring, you really don't want to blog about it. And Neil encouraged me strongly to participate nonetheless. And I never really got the courage to do so. But this presentation is going to be perhaps not my personal journey in great detail, but in a sense my professional journey through digital strategy and how my thoughts about digital strategy have evolved with my understanding of what a museum is in the digital age or in the 21st century. So I hope that is interesting and not too narcissistic, and hopefully there will be some learnings from some of my steps and missteps that others will be able to apply in thinking about their own approach to digital at their own museums as well. So if we move on to the first slide, actually, having said that, and thanks to that little delay, I did want to just flag that that first image on my cover slide is of beautiful balls of wire. Oh, thanks for going back. In the Baltimore Museum of Art. Some of you might be aware that we are near the end of a major renovation, so we have lots and lots of balls and rolls of wire and loose wires hanging from ceilings all over the place. About 60% of our building is currently under renovation, and so I was very grateful to my colleague Michelle Boardman for finding this image for me to represent the wiring the museum. As I go through, as I go through the presentation, I'm going to be really talking about three kind of moments in my own thought about digital strategy and the museum in this century. First of all, the distributed museum. Second, the formulation of the immersive museum, and finally that of the pervasive museum. And I'm not sure if those bullet points are showing up on the slide there, but that's in essence what they say. There we go. Okay. So the distributed museum, the immersive museum, and the pervasive museum. So I'm going to kind of, as usual when I try to tell a joke, tell the punchline first and blow the whole thing. This is where we're going, and we're going to end up at a model which has been beautifully represented to me, although obviously not intentionally, by the artist Colin Benjamin in this bleach drawing called Forward in All Directions, and I'll come back to that later on. Next, please. So when I start off thinking about developing a strategy, it in essence is in many ways a sort of a Venn diagram where I'm looking for the opportunities, and this is something that I know some of the speakers earlier today talked about, identifying where the opportunities are that technology makes a difference both for the organization and for the community or the audience that are being served. So you'll find me also as I talk through each of these models, the distributed, immersive, and pervasive museum, kind of calling out the opportunities from those three perspectives. That's not obviously the complete picture in a SWOT analysis, a strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat analysis, but I think it's a good starting place for 30 minutes today. Next, please. So the first kind of moment for me in thinking about what the museum is today and developing strategies in terms of using technology in them around that, our recent cultural movements, is that of the distributed museum. And this image here, which was taken by a visitor to the American Art Museum at the Smithsonian and the National Portrait Gallery, the Kogod Courtyard, that is at the core of both of those museums in Washington, D.C., really has come to be a perfect symbol for me of the place of the museum in a networked culture, where it is a node, perhaps a privileged one, but just one node among many in a three-dimensional network, which we might refer to as a distributed network, using the kind of technology sense of the term. So let me show you how I got to that in my thinking. Next, please. I started out when I came to the American Art Museum with a platform map, essentially, thinking about all the platforms where you could find content. If you can go back a slide, please. All the places where you could find content about the museum, and those included both platforms that the museum controlled and ones that the museum did not. So I just made this very simple kind of mind map. This is sort of how my brain works. It draws connections among things, often to the point of creating spaghetti. But the green spots at the top of the map were sort of the platforms that the museum controlled inside its physical space. The blue ones were the mobile platforms that were in the physical building, so the audio tours and whatnot. The yellow circles represent the online platforms that the museum controlled or was aiming to have, including a website, blog, etc. And then the red ones were all the platforms which way back in 2008 you could find museum content on, but the museum had not put it there and frankly had no control over what content was on those platforms. So this included Flickr, like the wonderful photo that I just showed you taken by a visitor to the museum, YouTube of course, Facebook, and other emerging social media platforms at the time as well. And it was interesting to see that at that time over half of those platforms were available in some way on mobile devices, and now I think just about all of them are, except for the analog platforms in the museum, which might be wall labels and signage and things like that. Next, please. So really asking what the opportunity was in terms of the culture of our community and audiences, it seemed that we were in a moment where we could really think about the museum going from Acropolis, from the temple to the muses, the safe place to put precious artifacts and keep them safe from barbarians or the hoi polloi or other marauders who might do damage to them, to, next slide please, a role as an agora, as a meeting place, a community space, a place of conversation and civic engagement, that instead of recognizing the multi-platform nature of the museum as a sign of a loss of control of platforms and content, it was really an opportunity to expand our conversation in this networked way. Next slide, please. And what I became very concerned about at the American Art Museum was ensuring that we weren't just becoming a multi-platform museum where our messages, our content could be found on an increasing number of platforms in different places, but that we were still controlling the message, but rather that we were introducing a feedback loop, that we were listening as much as we were speaking. And I do think that even today, which is quite a long time after 2008 and 9, when I was at the American Art Museum, we're seeing quite a lot of the use of new platforms actually mimics very strongly the way museums have always operated on analog platforms. And I think Coven Smith's recent keynote at Museum Next went right to the heart of this matter, and I have a link to his blog post about that at the end of this presentation, that we need to think about, next slide please, how we're not just replicating in the digital space the sort of broadcast, the sort of center outwards distribution of our messages and content that was developed in the analog era, but that we're also using the unique opportunities of new technologies to listen, to converse, to have two and multi-way exchanges. So going from being a multi-platform museum to being, next slide please, a distributed network. And as you see, I really did blow my punchline before I ever got there. So that was kind of my first movement and first set of thoughts around what is the museum in the digital era. And there is an essay that I wrote in 2009 about this that is published in Curator Journal from that year. Next slide, please. So the second sort of movement was starting to go from thinking about the museum as a distributed network to it being an immersive experience, where being there becomes the most, or the organizing principle. Next slide, please. And the journey to that kind of approach to strategy and the use of technology in shaping the museum of the 21st century was largely inspired by this man. This is Chris Anderson. He is the editor of Wired magazine, and early in 2009 he came to the Smithsonian and talked to us about what the Smithsonian 2.0 might be, what the Smithsonian might be in the digital age. And he proposed what he called, perhaps a crazy idea, which is that the Smithsonian could be the Wikipedia of the physical world, that we could in some way make every object have a citizen curator who would be trained and invited to come and photograph it and care for it and promote it and share knowledge about this object with the world. And as he put it, what could go wrong? A lot could go wrong. You could have a bad apple who might come in and break something or steal something, but imagine the reach you would get. Imagine the impact if every one of the Smithsonian's 130-some million objects had an ambassador who cared for and promoted it out in the digital sphere. This was an incredibly compelling idea for me, and I was very grateful to have heard it. When I started developing, I changed positions and moved on to work in mobile across the institution and was responsible for developing the digital strategy. So we can go to the next slide, please. So you might have heard the sort of vision of that strategy being articulated as use mobile to recruit the world. And that is not just as a sort of a pie in the sky, gesture towards collaboration and building community, but actually a very pragmatic solution to some really major problems that an institution at the scale of the Smithsonian has. just as one example, I was approached by the director of accessibility at the Smithsonian, who said, you know, she was very concerned that the Smithsonian was at risk of some sort of complaints or even lawsuits because we had so few verbal descriptions of our collection objects. Well, again, if you're talking about a collection of 130-some million objects, that's not something that even the Smithsonian, with its billion-dollar-a-year budget, is ever going to have the money, the time, or the staff to do on its own. So crowdsourcing or recruiting the world is really the only pragmatic solution to that particular problem. So we adopted that as the kind of the vision of using mobile. And next slide, please. Across the Smithsonian, and it was also informed by an understanding that the opportunity in terms of mobile technologies in 2010 was not just the broadcast or the transmission of knowledge from the museum to the audience, for example, in the form of an audio tour or some sort of narrowcast message. But that actually the current generation of mobile devices that people increasingly were bringing with them to the museum had the ability to listen as much as to broadcast or transmit, so that we could move from thinking about mobile in terms of headphones, i.e. the traditional audio tour, to thinking of it in terms of microphones, where we again listen, the museum listens as much as we speak. So Chris Anderson summarized this as going from we do the talking to we help you, the audience, do the talking. Max Anderson, speaking in another context, an article for the art newspaper, talked about moving from interpretation to conversation. So that combination of the opportunities and the needs and where cultural practice was took us, if we can go to the next slide, to a very interesting place where, again, later in 2010, I had the very good fortune to get to visit an installation by the artist Halsey at the Decordova Sculpture Park. Now, this is an artist who creates location-based scores and crowdsources voices to blend with his music, and the playback or the soundtrack changes as you move around a space. Now, as you can imagine, having spent about 8 years working for Antenna Audio, I've taken quite a few audio tours in my life, and I also have a PhD in sculpture, so I was frankly very skeptical about what value a crowdsourced audio tour-ish experience of a sculpture park would have, how much pleasure or engagement I would find in that. And it remains to this day, and it's why it's an example that if you've ever heard me talk before, you've probably heard me bring up. It remains a real touchstone in my practice. And I've spent a lot of time trying to understand why this experience impacted me so deeply, not just intellectually, but emotionally. And if we can move to the next slide, I'd like to share with you a few of the things that I think I learned there. Essentially, Halsey, and I don't think this was entirely consciously, took the basic elements of a museum mobile experience and transformed the way that they were used in their relationship to one another. And the way they were transformed really responds to this new networked culture that internet and connected technologies are both creating and being created by today. So if we can just kind of go through these points. I didn't realize I was going to have the benefits of animation here. It's very exciting. So the traditional audio tour stop, the place where a visitor physically stops and generally listens to more information about an object, in Halsey's appscapes become soundtracks. Because the visitor contributions are geocoded as they are recorded into the app, the longer you stand in a place, the more you hear, the more responses of visitors that were recorded in that location. The second bullet point, please. And those soundtracks are no longer linear. So in the original audio tours, which were on cassette tapes, really moving through a space required following a linear footage of creating a very immersive experience, and also allowing the creators of the audio tour to build on information, so they could tell you at the outset of the visit, you know, who that woman is holding the baby that you're going to see all around the European Renaissance Art Gallery, which might be quite important if you're visiting the museum and come from a Buddhist tradition, for example. But you don't have to repeat that at every stop. You can kind of build on the story. But of course the logistical problems are that it's very easy to get lost, and once you've fallen off the route of the tape, it's hard to get back on, and it's not a lot of fun to feel like you're being herded through a space for a lot of people as well. So you can have that immersive experience but not be controlled in terms of your progression through the space of, in this case, the sculpture garden. The next point, please. This broadcast of content, which again in the traditional audio tour situation would be from the museum's voice, or a museum's sanctioned and solicited voice in some way, actually becomes a real conversation where visitors add their voices over time to the content. And next point, please. And that conversation is asynchronous, so I can come and respond to the voices and the comments that I've heard that came before me. And finally, last point please, it's the body that is the interface to triggering that content. It's not just you know, a keyboard or some other menu on the screen that I touch to trigger the content. It's actually my physical movement which triggers the content, which, just as an aside, is a very interesting point to think about within the so-called IPOP theory of visitor motivations that's being developed at the Smithsonian by Andy Pekarik and others. So if you'd like to find out more about the Scapes app, if you can just advance one more time, there are some links and things there which I'm sure our hosts can make available in a more clickable format than in that slide. And it's all based on an open source platform that we later used at the Smithsonian to develop 4 different apps, and all of that code is available for other organizations to use. So if you're interested in mobile crowdsourcing, it's a fantastic resource that's available to you to develop as you wish, but it's also just an interesting model for how transformation can happen in the nature and the experience of the museum, even working with some very traditional elements like the basic components of an audio tour, but thinking about them differently. So thinking about them not within the paradigm of the museum as a hub and spoke, as a knowledgeable center that's, you know, sending its knowledge out into the world, but really as part of this 3-dimensional network where we're, again, listening as much as we're speaking, and we're involved in a continuous conversation with our audiences. And if you can advance to the next slide, please, when you're ready. Thank you very much. So one of, again, reflecting on the Scapes experience, and this is just one app, and it may, you know, seem like I'm kind of dwelling on this for a long time if I'm trying to think about digital strategies writ large for an institution like the Smithsonian, or not to mention the definition of what the museum is in the 21st century. But I was really struck by how that one experience started to reveal to me that, in a sense, the technology is developing in a sort of a spiral way. And indeed, this is something that I had heard Mike Edson say many years before, but it took a long time for me to understand it. That before the internet, of course, visiting a museum was very much about the location. You had to come to the physical building to see and experience things and engage in any way. There were catalogs, there were printed things that might circulate, but it was really an experience that was very much predicated on a physical presence. With the internet, of course, we were in a sense liberated from that. So it was possible to interact with museum content, you know, perhaps of dubious quality, but nonetheless to engage whenever we wanted to and from wherever we happened to be. With mobile, that sense of the importance of place comes back again, that where you are, which may not have to be at the DeCordova Sculpture Park or in any particular garden, but it once again becomes an important element in the kinds of experiences that we are designing. So for example, I can now think about creating location-based experiences that take into account the context of use that are around the museum's collection, content, programming, etc., designed for museum audiences, but with the knowledge that they are not physically in our building. And so it's very interesting to start to think about this opportunity as well in the very latest generation of technologies, including interior location-based technologies, as being so much about, you know, as always, location, location, location. And next slide, please. At the same time that, you know, location is, you know, again or evermore such a critical part of our culture and of how we use technology, I think we're also seeing a rise, and I'm not really sure what to trace this to, but of a demand for immersive experiences. So participatory theater, immersive theater like Sleep No More or Then She Fell, both of which are in New York and both of which I strongly encourage people to visit, is perhaps another paradigm that we can start to think about. How can technology create immersive experiences both in the museum and beyond? And certainly mobile is going to be a major platform for that. Okay, so that's kind of the movement through my second stage, if you will, of digital strategy. And if we can go to the next slide, please. I ended up really summarizing this for myself as being about being there. That you know, in early 2014, as I left the Smithsonian to come to the Baltimore Museum of Art, that was really the point I had arrived at in terms of thinking about mobile strategy, but with the sense that this idea of presence, of being there, was critical across all digital platforms as well. So next slide, please. Then moving into, once again, opening up and not just thinking about mobile, I asked, how can we take the immersive museum forward? And if we can go to the next slide. Again, giving you my punchline before I've told the joke. I ended up at the kind of basic concept of the VMAS digital strategy, which is currently in draft form being discussed by staff here, to arrive at the concept of the pervasive museum. And again, as in my use of the word distributed to talk about the distributed museum, first of all, in this talk, I'm using pervasive here in a technical sense and thinking about pervasive computing, the ability to be connected wherever you are. So next slide, please. And it was, in fact, as I mentioned earlier, sort of beautifully represented for me in this artwork. And, you know, I find, as you saw in my talking about Halsey work, it is almost always artists, or my other favorite inspiration for innovation in technology is accessibility applications. I really think that, you know, be it a pencil or a pixel, you put a tool in the hand of an artist and they will push it farther than anyone in the direction of innovation. So really do seek out opportunities to be inspired both by artists' direct uses of technology in terms of how we can think more innovatively about how we use those same platforms in the museum, but also just in thinking about the nature of the experience in general. So next slide, please. In thinking about the VMAS strategy, one of the processes that we went through, and I'm sorry these slides got a little squiffy when we made the PDF, we were thinking, obviously about a SWOT analysis, but and I won't go through it in exhaustive detail now, but just to pull out four of the kind of key challenges and opportunities facing us. And I think a lot of these apply to other museums, and perhaps in a sense particularly smaller, more localized museums. So I hope there might be something here for others participating in this conference that might seem to relate to their own experiences and their own museum's challenges. So, change is tough for everyone. But I think there is a real opportunity in being slightly smaller than the Smithsonian, to say the least, to be able to respond to change more agilely, a little bit more quickly. And that speed is, of course, critical when you're talking about changes in culture that are quite often largely driven by technology. We're challenged in remaining relevant to our audiences, and I think the BMA, and I'm sure many other museums as well, is ideally positioned to maintain relevance through collaboration with its audiences. So it's again that moving from interpretation to conversation, co-creating, and I know Jasper this morning talked about was it the Museum of Silk up in Derby in England, really co-creating the museum with its audience is a very, very powerful model. Visibility clearly is a challenge, particularly in a networked world, online, where there are millions, if not billions, of websites. How can particularly a smaller and less resourced, less well-known museum stand out? And I think there, too, we can actually look to our roots, to our local resources, and speaking with a local accent is something that allows a smaller museum to really punch above its weight online. So, a smaller museum may not have the brand recognition of some of the bigger ones, but it does have less of an institutional voice, or it can have, if it's speaking with a local accent. And I think one of the things that we're seeing with social media as well is a valorization and a demand for what is authentic, what is unique in some way. And certainly speaking from the culture of the immediate community around the physical museum can be a way to really characterize your social media, your online presence, and stand out from the crowd. And finally, sustainability. This is again a challenge that faces all of us. And I really appreciated Nick Honeysett's presentation, which unfortunately I didn't get the live version, but I was able to catch up looking at his Prezi. And as always, he goes right to the heart of the matter, talking about the importance of content. That content, is not just king, but kingpin in some way. And I was really pleased when I came to the BMA to discover that although there hadn't been a lot of digital projects, what had been done in the past really was of high quality and therefore was enduring. And so the platforms might change. We might need to update our virtual tour software for the Cohn Sisters virtual apartment, for example, or we might change the technology that delivers our mobile content, but the content itself is of a quality that really can endure long term. Okay, so next slide, please. So what is the unique opportunity that the technology landscape affords museums now? And again, kind of pulling back from just thinking about mobile, it strikes me that it is this opportunity to be always connected. So it's not only subway stations that can be Wi-Fi stations now, but museums as well. And I did hear other speakers as well talk about how critical it is to have Wi-Fi throughout the museum. Next slide, please. So that really led me towards the idea of our digital strategy at the BMA being predicated on this idea of being everywhere. So that is the vision. It's sort of like Recruit the World was the vision for the Smithsonian's mobile strategy. At the BMA, the vision that I have proposed is be everywhere, or forward in all directions, as Colin Benjamin might put it. Now, the vision is not necessarily something that you're going to achieve in a literal sense. It is more like the North Star. Even though you're not going to get there, the vision is there to guide you, to determine your path and your direction at all times. And so being everywhere means taking advantage of pervasive computing and the always connected nature of cultural experience that is developing today, and really thinking beyond the museum as a destination, as an end point on a journey, but perhaps sometimes as a midway point, or a starting point, or a launching pad, or a node again in this three-dimensional, very complex network that our culture has become. So next slide, please. That's our director, Dorian Bolger, with the bleach drawing, and I'm very fortunate that Dorian really gets it, and it's been really her vision that has led to the development of the digital division at the BMA. But of course, adopting such an ambitious vision of be everywhere, forward in all directions, it's paradoxical even, raises the question of how and what do we prioritize. So next slide, please. We developed really, again, apologies for the squiffy PDF here, we developed just a few ideas of ways in which, as projects and initiatives come forward, or even strategies and approaches to things are considered, how we decide where to put our resources and which to do first. So again, if the principle is this 3D connected culture, we really don't want to do anything that leads towards silos, that leads towards orphan projects or kind of one-offs. So these are just a few of the principles for prioritization that we came up with, that all initiatives should be aligned with the institutional mission, that they should enable us to connect multiple platforms and communities and initiatives, that they should serve to position the BMA as a convener of conversations and to work very collaboratively, that they should be designed to iterate wherever possible, so that we're more flexible and agile in adapting to change, that they should always be measurable so that we can really set what are our measures for success and know how we've done against them and learn from all of our projects and pay that knowledge forward. We also hit upon risk as a very important core value, that actually the museum itself, and I'm sure again this is true of so many museums, would not exist had not some very visionary people taken some really important risks in the past. Starting with, in the case of the Baltimore Museum of Art, the mayor and the kind of founders of the museum decided the city, a great city, needed a great museum, and so they founded one in 1914 without a single object in the collection. So that was a pretty risky move, and it was followed by some really important collectors, the Cone sisters, who went out collecting early modernism at a time when those kinds of impressionist paintings, etc., were considered kind of bad painting by many. Sadie May followed them soon after. The sorts of works, surrealists, etc., that she collected were called degenerate by the Nazis, among others. Thank God they took the risk to collect those works, because those really form the backbone of our collection today. And last but not least, we're looking for initiatives and approaches that allow us to return something to our communities, that they don't just benefit the BMA, but they really are creating network effects and increasing the return for everyone. So last slide, well, next to last slide, please. The thing that has really surprised me, though, as I've taken on this role of leading the digital strategy at the BMA, is recognizing how important, if you're going to be everywhere, it is to have a global brand. So if you're going to really seriously try to put your museum and your content in all sorts of contexts where audiences may not expect to encounter an art museum or art, let alone your museum, that experience, that encounter, really needs to carry some link back. You can call it a brand, you can call it content phoning home, so it might be an actual technical thing, or it might be more of a feeling or a look and feel, a visual identity that allows that audience to trace it back to its origins, so that they can find more of the same, get involved in more communities and more conversations that are convened around the platform that is the museum. So I was fascinated to find in my favorite source for images, Google Images, this wonderful open source image, or CC image of not only my feedback loop around turning the museum from hub and spoke model to distributed network model, but actually a global brand image as well. So that's something that we had a rather unexpected turn of events shortly after I got to the BMA that kind of forced the issue, but in a very fortuitous way, where I was asked to take on leadership of marketing and communications as well as digital. And there was an understanding, and in fact already the marketing and communications team had done an awful lot to build their digital capacity and really, get it. It's just an extraordinary team. But I think it's probably the first time that marketing and communications has been kind of folded in under digital rather than the other way around. And it may be an anomaly, but it's interesting to watch, and I think, again, we saw some of this in Nick's keynote as well, how we're moving from the idea of digital as its own separate thing to digital being, as Tate put it, a dimension of everything. So having those skills, having that strategy inform really all of the processes and all of the collaborations across the museum. So I'll just end with a slide of some of my latest favorite reads that are informing my thinking around all of this. Again, I'm sure my colleagues there at NMC can share these links with you. Ed Rodley very helpfully pulled together threads around the leak of the New York Times digital strategy. I think it's a really critical read for anybody working in this space, with a lot of wonderful ideas, and the commentary around it is as interesting as the document. Coven Smith's keynote, which I mentioned earlier, The Museum is Skeuomorph, is another fantastic read, and Colleen Dillenschneider's response to that, the real reason some nonprofits stink at digital and why it's getting worse. I mean, Colleen's blog is just a constant reference for me, and I expect will become even more so now that I'll be working even more closely with marketing and communications. And last but by no means least, I highly recommend Rob Stein's essay, Museums So What?, which was recently published in the new Code Words initiative that Ed Rodley and Suze Cairns and Mike Edson and others have been leading. I really consider this one of the most important pieces of writing about museums that I've ever read, and it really goes to the heart of the question of what is the value of museums and how do we measure and demonstrate and communicate it. So I hope those will be, I'm sure those will be far more inspiring than my talk, but I hope that the ensemble has been useful to all of you in some way. And please come see us at the BMA, online or in person. Thank you.
All right, thanks for closing us out, Nancy. And I just want to bring some closing thoughts for today, things that I picked up from the different presentations, and I think from the beginning, Jasper, to quote one of his slides, he wrote, "Changes in technology represent larger developments in society, unearthing larger societal trends." Nick Honeysett said something along the similar lines in talking about digital strategy. Align and evolve institution with cultural and societal trends. So it's this idea of where is society going when you think about the future of museums? What do maker spaces and crowdsourcing say about society? Well, museums are responding to this responding to a participation trend. Excuse me, third time's a charm. Museums are responding to the participation trend. What do BYOD and location-based services say about society? Museums are responding to a personalization trend. And I think Nancy's has an interesting way of kind of bringing this all together, because her presentation connects this participation, I said it right that time, and personalization through this idea of mobiles and the idea of the mobile, this mobile trend of mobility. With that, I want, on behalf of the NMC, the New Media Consortium, Learning Revolution, the Center for the Future of Museums at AAM, I want to thank Nancy and our other keynoters, Jasper and Nick, as well as our BYOD crowdsourcing, location-based services, and makerspaces panelists. Participants, if you want more information on anything you saw or heard today, let us know by contacting me directly at alex@nmc.org. To get involved in our community, please visit our website at nmc.org, like us on Facebook, or friend us on Twitter at nmc.org. Let's keep this momentum going by joining me tomorrow at the Future of Museums Conference, held being presented by Learning Revolution. And you can sign up for this free event at futureofmuseums.com. That's futureofmuseums.com. Hopefully I will see you there tomorrow. If not, thank you for taking time to spend with us here with the NMC and our fabulous lineup of keynotes and presentations. And with that, I'd like to bid you all a good day, and thank you for joining us. Goodbye.